There we go. All right, Greg, we'll go to you in 5, 4.
What is happening, everybody? It is Saturday afternoon, which means it is time for myself and a Millionaire Maker winner, Neil Orfield, to break down the upcoming slate from a tournament perspective. We're talking week 9 of the NFL season, which, listen, if we're being honest, it's not the prettiest on paper, Neil, but what does it really matter? Because we're playing DFS all the same. We're going to be betting on the games and hopefully trying to find the best paths to make some money. And this content is free. The only thing we ask of you guys as you come in, just support us by doing a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. That'll only take a couple of clicks, a half second of your time. We really do appreciate it. And shout out to DraftKings Rainmakers, who is sponsoring the show today. If you guys want to check out DraftKings Rainmakers, claim the free starters pack using the link below because it's free. And you can use those cards to win actual cash prizes. They're going to give you a full set of cards, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, the whole deal. And then you can enter those free cards into contests to win actual money. So go check it out. There's no downside at all. And we also got Mike Lawrence back here. Mike, who's long been the producer of the show, but he was away making a movie. He was Mr. Hollywood over here. And now he has graced us with his presence back here and pretend he doesn't remember how the show works before the show starts because he's so far removed making his horror movies. So we got Mike back in the picture. But Neil, what is happening and how was last weekend for you?
Well, first of all, Greg, before we say, I just realized as we were going live, I have not actually talked to you in person since you took down $100,000 last Saturday night in NBA. So congrats on that. You've had an epic run to start the season in NBA. And it's my understanding that you didn't run any tools. You just listened to me and EMAC on Live Before Lock and just followed our advice. Is that right?
No, very far from the truth. It's so what I have been doing though is if you guys are looking for NBA DFS advice on Saturday nights, always go ahead and listen to Neil and EMAC on Live Before Lock. We've got all of our new NBA tools on the site, which have been really valuable for me. And it's made my NBA process a lot easier as well, particularly late swap, where I could upload my lineups into our late swap tool and optimize for swaps as stuff happens, which was big last weekend when I won the $15 on DraftKings. Because if you remember, we had Donovan Mitchell. He was listed as questionable. He got ruled out right before the slate started. And then there was the Miami Heat had players out, and they ended up going with like a totally different starting lineup that was expected. So I've been using the late swap tool a lot, and that's really what's helped me. And it never hurts that you and EMAC were on the show, but I wasn't watching last week.
I mean, it meant that you were not on the show and you were paying attention to your lineups. So I guess that helps. Yeah, congrats on that. That is awesome start to the NBA season, especially to get it that early, that you're just like playing with house money from now on. Really cool to start with the big W. I played NBA last night. I decided at the last minute to play. I listened to like the last 20 minutes of you and Bellman, and I used the Sims tool and I profited on the slate. It was like a slate I had no business playing because I hadn't thought about it all day until like 20 minutes before lock. And I was like, screw it. I'm going to throw some lineups in there, and not a huge profit, but got up there a little bit and profited.
Yeah, it's been
same thing last night. I was in the car listening to them too and threw a couple lineups in and won like $260 because of
damn.
Greg and Matt. Yeah, so not too bad.
Nice. Love to hear it. Yeah, it's been a really good start to the NBA season. I've won a couple tournaments on FanDuel and DraftKings, and we're only like a week and a half into the year. So really looking forward to what the rest of the year is going to have in store for us. And we'll talk a little bit more about some NBA promos we're running right now, but more importantly, football that we've got here to talk about. And Neil, this is a very ugly slate on paper for a couple of reasons. There's teams on buys. It's a shorter slate. We do have one very good game, but it's taking place in Germany. So that's not going to be on the slate. So we're losing 2 premier teams because of that. And just kind of curious, does a slate like this with so many ugly matchups on paper and just incredibly low totals, if I go and pull up the current totals, you never see anything like this. The highest total of the entire slate is Eagles Cowboys 46.5. Very low. And in fact, there's only a total of, 4 games on the entire slate that even have a total north of 40. And that one Eagles Cowboys game is the only game with a total even north of 45 points. Does that change your lineup construction in any way?
That's a really good question. I don't think it does. I'll run the Sims and see what the Sims tell me. So I guess the Sims will give me a better answer than I can give you. I'm trying to think of how it would, having a lower totals. Maybe that means I can't decide if that means overstacking or understacking, because you really when you are stacking, you're hoping for one game to blow up. And it seems like on a slate with lower totals, if one game does go off, that is going to just be, separate really easily from the field. So maybe you want to overstack. On the other hand, maybe none of these games can support, 5 players from the same game. So I'm torn a little bit, but that's the beauty of using tools like The Sims, is that it will know how to play this. My guess would be not all that different in terms of construction. Has it changed much for you?
Yeah. So one thing that I was doing when I was messing around building lineups before this show, and by the way, I see people asking a question about DeMarcado. He was ruled out not all that long ago. So if you guys are building lineups, first off, the projections are going to be updated well ahead of tomorrow. But if you're just playing around making lineups, the easiest way to take DeMarcado out is either if you're using the contest generator, you could actually just remove him from the pool. That is one of the times you would actually remove somebody from the contest generator. Or if you're building lineups and you haven't removed them from the contest generator, you could just do a massive negative ROI boost to DeMarcado, and that will just basically artificially take him out of lineups. But one thing that I am doing when I'm building my lineups out is I'm filtering out the triple stack with QBs, because I just don't think those are all that likely to be successful on games where it's like, oh, this team is expected to score 17 points. It seems unlikely to me that a triple stack would work out, when that really is what most of these teams are projected for.
Yeah, it seems like it'll be tough to sustain a triple stack.
So that's really the one change I'm making, is not going to be playing any triple stacks this weekend unless something was to like really change. But even then, the game that's expected to be high scoring, we got Mike's Eagles taking on the Dallas Cowboys. And we'll start talking about quarterbacks in a second, because I think that is the premier game to be targeting on the slate from a stacking purpose. But then even that game that's supposed to be high scoring, like, how do you reasonably get to the Eagles in a triple stack based on what the salaries are there? So I'm going to be playing primarily single stacks, some double stacks this week as well, just because of what the pricing is. But let's start by talking about the QBs that we want to be getting to this weekend, Neil. And we have that one game that's expected to be a shootout relative to the other games on the slate. With that in mind, how high of a priority is Jalen Hurts for you at the high end of quarterback?
Yeah, pretty high priority. We actually have positive leverage on Hurts. It's interesting because it's not a great spot against Dallas, like really, really tough matchup for Hurts. Maybe he gets to going a little bit more on his legs in a tough matchup, but we've got him at just 16% ownership, 18% chance of being the top stack. There are really only two like great pay up options on the slate. I guess two pay up options, period, on this slate, and both really intrigue me, but that is the one that we have positive leverage on. The Eagles have just been so good all year that even in a tough matchup, I'm willing to get above that 16% that the field is getting to. I don't feel as strongly about it as I did last week against the Commanders. Like, I was all in on the Eagles offense last week against the Commanders, and it ended up getting there in the second half. But this week, I think I'm going to be above the field. It's not going to be like a 40% of my lineups kind of play, though, just because the matchup isn't the best against Dallas. How are you playing it?
Yeah, so if I go ahead and look at my lineups right here, there is one quarterback I'm getting a good amount of exposure to, more than everybody else on DraftKings. We'll talk about him in a second. Maybe you'll be able to guess who it is. But it is not Jalen Hurts. But that said, Jalen Hurts is my second most rostered quarterback over on DraftKings. And almost all the lineups I have with Jalen Hurts are single stacks. Some of them are double stacks with either Devontae Smith or AJ Brown, primarily AJ Brown and Dallas Goedert. But a lot of Jalen Hurts single stacks, making it into my top 150 lineups. If you're going to be paying up at quarterback, I certainly think that's the place to go, is with Jalen Hurts. And he's my second most rostered quarterback of the entire slate. So Jalen Hurts, definitely somebody who I am liking getting to right now. And, there aren't a lot of slates where I've paid up at quarterback this year. There's been some of them here or there, but this is one where, because of this one game environment, I do view as being much better than the other ones. I like paying up for Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And you got high implied team totals on both sides. As you said earlier, like one of the few games that actually projects really well on both sides. So you have much greater odds of a shootout in this one.
Yeah, and over on FanDuel, I still get to a decent amount of Jalen Hurts, but he's 9,000 over on FanDuel, which is a very steep price point. So I like him, to some extent on FanDuel and DraftKings, but he's more of a priority for me on DK than FanDuel, because 9,000 for a quarterback, like I said, fairly steep price point. But the other pay up quarterback that we have on the slate that I am getting to more of on FanDuel than I'm getting to Jalen Hurts is actually Lamar Jackson. So if I'm paying up for a quarterback on FanDuel, I prefer Lamar Jackson. If I'm paying up for a quarterback on DK, I prefer Jalen Hurts. You're getting a few $100 salary savings on Jackson on FanDuel. And then also the rushing yardage and the rushing touchdown equity is a little more valuable on FanDuel than it is on DK. Particularly, there's none of the passing yard bonuses and whatnot. So Lamar Jackson, my preferred spend up on FanDuel. Still like him on DK, but slightly different views on the pay up QBs from me across the two different sites. Lamar Jackson relative to Jalen Hurts, do you have a preference between them?
Yeah, to be honest, coming in, I thought for sure it was going to be Lamar Jackson. Much better matchup against Seattle. I thought, both elite quarterbacks. And I was thinking I'd rather go to the guy who is in the better matchup. What's interesting is we actually have Jalen Hurts with higher ownership, and still Jalen Hurts is the one with positive leverage. So ultimately, I'm going to be playing a lot of these guys. I think similar to last week. I think you and I played it a little bit differently last week in that I paid up for quarterbacks a lot last week with both Jalen Hurts and Lamar. I think I'm doing the same thing this week. I think I'm going to have a lot of those two. Maybe not to the same extent as last week though, because there are some cheaper quarterbacks who look really good in the tools who I'm really interested in. But I actually think I'm probably going to be above the 13% we have on Lamar too. My guess is that I'll be 20 to 25% each of Lamar and Hurts, and then I'll mix in some of the cheaper options as well. But there aren't that many cheap options that I really love this week, so I do think I'm going to still be playing a lot of both Hurts and Lamar.
Yeah, and there's still quarterbacks who are somewhat of priorities in my player pool, so it's not like I'm saying you can't play one, have to play the other. But do you want to guess who my most rostered quarterback is on both FanDuel and DraftKings right now, Neil?
Both FanDuel and DraftKings most rostered quarterback. I'm going to go with is it CJ Stroud?
It is not CJ Stroud.
Derek Carr.
It is Derek Carr. And it's one that I saw as soon as I got into the YouTube chat. Let me see who it was. That was, oh, here we go. It was Chris Carnahan in the YouTube chat. So Greg was all over Dak Lamb stacks last week. And then after that, he said, I have a feeling this week everybody's going to be going Carr, Kamara, Olave, Thomas. Hopefully Greg sees it another way. I don't. And here is why. First off, it's a relatively cheap stack, right? This is not all that expensive to stack up the Saints. We've also talked a lot about Kamara being a viable, basically like wide receiver type. Even though he has running back eligibility, you might as well consider Kamara a wide receiver at this point. I mean, he's getting just all of the targets in the world. We've seen multiple games where he's had 13 plus targets this year. And Derek Carr's throwing the ball a shit ton because the way that they're using Kamara is not in traditional running situations. They're throwing the ball to him a whole bunch. So as a result, you look at Derek Carr's numbers, his pass attempts, last week they won pretty comfortably, so we didn't have to throw all that often. But the other games before that, I mean, he threw 55 passes against the Jaguars. He threw 50 passes against the Texans, and now he's got a matchup against the Bears, which, are they going to blow them out? Maybe, but I can't really expect that. In games that have been relatively competitive, which the spread does indicate this game is going to be, the Saints are 8-point favorites. It's not like it's a crazy lopsided spread. They're throwing the ball a ton in close games or games that they're down. So just because of the passing volume upside potential, I like getting to the Saints and Derek Carr.
Yeah, the volume is just insane for Kamara, but just in general for New Orleans has been, and really we haven't seen it hit with Chris Olave yet, which I think is going to drive down ownership a little bit. Yeah, I think there's a lot to like about Derek Carr. He's when I mentioned the cheaper quarterbacks I think I'm playing this week, and like they're not quarterbacks that you're typically really jazzed to play. I mean, Derek Carr is not something that I've played a ton of this year, but this week he looks great. Sub 7% ownership, 7% chance to be in the top stack, greater than 7% chance to be in the top value stack. It's just a little bit too cheap, and there are a number of options. Like you can go to Chris Olave. I played some Rashid Shaheed last week, which honestly he is not really getting the reps. He's not playing enough snaps to totally break a slate. But Rashid Shaheed last week had like 3 catches for 150 yards, something ridiculous like that. And then of course you have Michael Thomas, who's still very involved, and Kamara. So there's just so many options that you can pair with Derek Carr, and you can majorly stack it or just play single stack, double stack. A lot of ways to play it, but I'm with you. I like it quite a bit against Chicago here.
Yeah, so that's what I'm getting to a whole bunch, and I do think there's probably going to be a pretty good amount of people getting there, but our data really indicates that that's where we should be going when I'm running lineups through our Sims tool for both DK and for FanDuel. Like this is the team where I was getting 2 triple stacks of the Saints. Like I said, I'm going to be filtering out my triple stacks for this week, which I did when I was looking for my exposures, is I took those out just so I had a better sense of what I would more prefer to be playing for this kind of slate. But it's also not like we're looking at a 20% owned Derek Carr or anything like that. Right? He's going to be relatively popular compared to other quarterbacks. We have him as the 4th most popular QB on DK, but it's still 6.7% projected ownership. And if we look at his ownership over on FanDuel, it is projected for, let's see, where is he on FanDuel? Actually, Carr is only projected for 2% exposure on FanDuel. So he is fairly contrarian over on FanDuel, and then like middling ownership on DK.
Yeah, looks good in both spots. I haven't decided if I'm playing on FanDuel at all. I've only really looked at DraftKings so far, but yeah, certainly in play either place. Obviously, you prefer the PPR with Kamara, but you're talking about Carr. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you can play him either place.
What are the other QBs that you're getting to then? So is there anything else that you're really prioritizing? I've got 3 QBs that I've talked about so far. I all have double-digit exposure to. There are 2 other quarterbacks that I have double-digit exposure to. You guessed one of them before, Neil. CJ Stroud is one of them. And then I've got another one who, if people watch the sim show I did with Lofty yesterday, might have a good sense of who it is I like getting to. It's a very ugly stack to have a quarterback. Do you want to guess who that final one is that I have double-digit exposure to?
All right, I'm gonna go with. Who is it? Is it the Panthers?
No, thank God it's not the Panthers.
I saw somebody in chat bringing up that you like the Panthers, so I thought
No,
maybe they actually
no.
they look good in the tool, or they were suggesting that maybe you should. I'll go with the Patriots.
It is the Patriots, and it's one of these situations where Mac Jones is clearly terrible, right? Like, I don't think any of us have much faith in him long term. Most of his wide receivers are out, which is kind of a blessing and a curse for DFS purposes, because all of his pass catching options are really cheap. And Demario Douglas is projecting out, if you run lineups through our simulations, as the guy who's like the top overall ROI play on the slate. He's going to be fairly popular as a wide receiver option, but who else is Mac Jones going to throw the football to? So it's kind of funny, right? Because the way that people are looking at this slate is they're saying, why do I want to play the Patriots? Who is Mac Jones going to throw the football to? And I'm looking at, I want to play the Patriots because who else does Mac Jones have to throw the football to? So it's like the same thing, but with a different amount of enthusiasm to it. If Mac Jones throws for like even 200 yards in this game, I just don't see a way that there isn't a wide receiver or a tight end that ends up standing out as a good value from this team.
Yeah, and Demario Douglas, as you mentioned, seems to be the guy, and he's really cheap. Yeah, there is just such an easy stack to do that is relatively inexpensive. And this Commanders defense, like, they just get eaten alive. They've been getting crushed all year against passing games. Does it get even better now without Montez Sweat and Chase Young there? Like, is it just going to be teams just crushing them across the board? I don't know, but I'm willing to test it out even with this Patriots. It's funny that this Patriots offense is the first one we get against the Commanders without Montez Sweat and Chase Young. Will be interesting to see how it goes. There's a part of me that wants the Patriots to not really do much and people to forget how bad this defense is, and then we can just jam whatever team is playing them next week. But I'm going to be taking my shots on the Patriots. Makes a lot of sense. Agreed. Like, it's both Derek Carr, Mac Jones. These are the quarterbacks we're playing this week. That is how ugly this slate is. But they both are in great spots. I'm with you. I'm going to be playing a good amount of Mac Jones with Demario Douglas in particular. I knew I ran the lineup gen earlier. I got some. I know Mike Gesicki in there as well. So I guess there are some other options that you could play there, but yeah, just a really, really easy stack there against an atrocious Commanders defense.
Yeah, and one thing that is pretty nice is the order of the quarterbacks is a little bit different, but I have the exact same 5 quarterbacks as the 5 quarterbacks I've double-digit exposure to this weekend on both FanDuel and DraftKings in my initial run of lineups. It's Derek Carr is my most popular on each site, and then Jalen Hurts being my second most rostered on DraftKings. I've got Lamar Jackson, my second most rostered on FanDuel. So that's what it's looking like my QB exposure is going to be in the teams I'm building stacks around. Neil, for yourself, are there any other quarterbacks that are important to your player pool at the QB position?
Yeah, so we already mentioned Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Derek Carr, Mac Jones. For me, CJ Stroud, I think, is going to be a big part of my lineups. We've got him at 5% ownership, 6% chance of being the top stack there in Houston. And he's relatively inexpensive. You kind of know where you want to go there with Nico Collins, Tank Dell. I might do some double stacks. We haven't seen it hit yet, the Nico Collins and Tank Dell in the same week, as far as I could be wrong about that, but I don't remember it really hitting yet. But it's inevitable that it's going to hit eventually. So I like the idea of doing that double stack, maybe even Dalton Schultz in there. A lot to like about that CJ Stroud Houston stack. Kind of considering I'll probably play at least some Cleveland, Deshaun Watson against Arizona. I mean, he's been so bad this year that it's another quarterback that I'm not super excited to click the name, but against that Arizona defense that has been pretty bad. I mean, they've somehow Lamar didn't do much against them last week, but in general, they've been a pretty bad defense. So, with Deshaun Watson seemingly like picking and choosing his spots to play against bad defenses, maybe he's ready to cut them up. So I'm going to take some shots on Deshaun Watson and some Cleveland stacks, I think. I don't know if I'm going to go to Aiden O'Connell. Looks pretty good in the tools. 2.8% projected ownership, 4.7% chance of being the top stack. Giants have a pretty bad defense, so you could go there. I'm not sure if I will. Bryce Young actually looks pretty good in the tools. I might take some shots there. I think I'm probably more likely. I don't know why. I'm just a sucker for playing Bryce Young and hoping that one of these weeks he turns into the number one overall pick. But 1.9% projected ownership, 4.3% chance to be in the top stack. Maybe I'll take a couple of shots there. If Stafford plays, I'd play some Stafford. I don't know that I'd play the backup quarterback for the Rams. And I think we didn't really talk about Dak much, but I think you can. Dak also looks good again this week. I know you loved him last week, and he absolutely smashed. Not quite the same spot this week, but we still got him at 8% projected ownership, 9% chance to be in the top stack. So another stack you can consider there.
Yeah. So as far as Dak goes, I did end up pretty far underweight to the field on him. I only ended up with 2% of him on DraftKings, 3% on FanDuel. So with that being in mind, what his ownership is, like, I way prefer the Eagles side of that game. I'm happy I was a week early on Dak, and I don't think I'm going to end up really being on him in this spot. And anything else you want to talk about a quarterback, though?
No, I think that's it.
All right, so we will move over to running back then. And running back is a spot where I think the mid-range looks really, really good at running back this weekend, Neil. And I think the field does as well, because that's where some of the most ownership is. Of the running backs that we have projected for 20+% ownership, actually, let's go to 15+% ownership. And I'll just read off these names, because like a bunch of guys that are very close together in ownership. There's not one guy who's projected for like 30% ownership or anything like that on DK, but we have all of these backs that are projected for between 15 and 22% ownership. Jonathan Taylor, Bijan Robinson, Chuba Hubbard, Rashad White, Ramondre Stevenson, Saquon Barkley, Tony Pollard, Josh Jacobs, Alvin Kamara. And the price ranges on those guys, Kamara's the most expensive at 8,100, and then Barkley a little bit behind at 7,900. But for the most part, these guys are priced in like the mid 6K to the 5K range. Is there anything that you are looking at the running back position that you want to do like way differently than the field? Or do you think it makes sense to be able to be building lineups kind of in the mid-range?
Yeah, honestly, I think that it largely makes sense. I think I'm going to be living mostly in the mid-range. I like a lot of these players. Josh Jacobs looks fantastic this week. Ramondre Stevenson, I'm really intrigued by what this Commanders defense is going to look like without Montez Sweat and Chase Young. Like, they've been big time a pass funnel, but who knows if, without those two, if they're going to be able to run a little bit easier as well. So I really like Ramondre Stevenson. Chuba Hubbard already named the starting running back. He's only 5,000 for the Panthers. Nice spot against the Colts. And then Jonathan Taylor, of course, looks great going up against that Panthers defense, just 6,400. Man, is he ever going to be the bell cow? That's my only concern. Like, Jonathan Taylor, last week we saw him so good in the first half. He had like 95 yards in the first half. He did seem to injure himself. Maybe we'll get some rumblings about whether he is hurt, but like, there was a play at the end of the first half where he seemed to bang himself up a little bit. Then of course the coach comes out and says, no, he wasn't injured. It's just a bizarre situation there, but I'm still going to, as long as we don't have any like word on limitations or anything, I'm going to assume that Jonathan Taylor is a full go, and it's a smash spot against the Panthers. So yeah, I think I'm largely going to be building in that mid-range. We do have, Kamara, Barkley both look really good, and they're pay up options. But for the most part, yeah, living in that mid-range, I think.
The quote was even more confusing, because I think what he said is in reference to why Jonathan Taylor's workload decreased. He said they were just riding the hot hand. Taylor had like 95 rushing yards midway through the second quarter and finished with 95 rushing yards. And it wasn't like it was a Saquon Barkley game where Barkley's had these games where it's like 40 touches for 100 yards or something like that, like he did last week. Yeah. It was Taylor had, 12 carries for 95 yards and and then just like stopped touching the football. So I don't really know what to make of that game. Maybe there was something else. Maybe he missed a blocking assignment, and that's something that, maybe we missed that doesn't show up on the stat sheet, that maybe that put him in the bad grace of the coaching staff. But I tend to think that Taylor is going to be good to go for this week without any real concerns. And this is something you had brought up last week when we were doing the show, Neil. It's actually a reason why right before the slate lock, and I was building my final set of lineups, I did do an ROI boost in the Sims tool to Jonathan Taylor, because you had said, like, when are we going to get Jonathan Taylor at this kind of price point again? Right. And it kind of remains the same point again this week. Now on DraftKings, his price gone up by $200, but still, he's $6,400 over on DK. On FanDuel, we have him priced at $8,000. So a little bit more expensive over on FanDuel, to be sure, but this is still a lot cheaper than the historical pricing that we have seen for Jonathan Taylor. Gardner Minshew, at least as far as backup quarterbacks go, He's one of the, if not the best backup quarterback that we have in all of the NFL. So it's still a competent offense there. And I think Jonathan Taylor is still a player in the mid-range who warrants a lot of ownership this weekend.
Yeah, I'm totally there. And maybe I should say, just to get Jonathan Taylor on track, maybe I'll consider Zach Moss this week, because every week I'm like, no, you can't play Zach Moss. You can't play Zach Moss. Jonathan Taylor is going to take over, and he's been the one who's actually gotten it done more frequently. So maybe I'll consider doing some Zach Moss just to make my Jonathan Taylor lineups better. That's how it works for sure. Just like, I don't know, what do you call it? Karma? I don't know what you call that exactly.
It's not called
reverse
it's not
jinxing myself. It's not karma. It's reverse jinxing myself. I don't know, but I'm trying to do us all a favor and say I'll play some Zach Moss so that Jonathan Taylor can finally get going.
Over my left shoulder, Neil, if you can kind of see out of the corner, I have a couple of signed football helmets.
Yes,
and
I can't see them actually.
All right.
Oh, that shoulder. I see now.
They're over here.
Yep.
The one right there is Jonathan Taylor. Nothing good has happened to Jonathan Taylor since I got that helmet. I got that helmet last year. He immediately got injured. Then the offseason starts. He demands a trade. And now it seems like he's losing touches to Zach Moss in the backfield. It's a very cool helmet. But with that aside, and no bias this year. Yeah.
One good thing happened in that he did get his big contract. So that was one good thing happened for him, not for us regarding him. But, he got a big contract at least.
That's true. That is something to benefit him as far as fantasy goes and his output. Nothing good has happened since I got that helmet, but I think it changes this week. I think this is where he finally starts to break out. And one thing though, I think we have to pull as a positive sign from last week, he was very efficient when he touched the football. If you're going to get 12, 13 carries for nearly 100 yards, that's going to lend itself to more fantasy production and more opportunities moving forward more often than not. So I am thinking we're going to get a bigger role out of Jonathan Taylor this weekend. Of the options that are popular in that mid-range, do you have one you don't like relative to the field?
I mean, just looking at the tools, Tony Pollard doesn't look great. He's 6,800. We have him at 21% ownership, 12% chance of being optimal. Tough matchup with that Eagles defense, which has actually been a little bit of a pass funnel so far this year, which I was not really expecting, but they are, in terms of DVOA, 23rd against the pass, first against the rush. Tony Pollard hasn't really gotten it done so far this year. So with the field jumping onto Tony Pollard in a bad matchup, I think I'm going to be underweight to Tony Pollard. I don't know that I'm going to get to a ton of Rachaad White. I get it. He's 5,600. Seems like a spot you could go to, but I imagine I'm going to be underweight to Rachaad White. It is a great matchup with the Texans, but again, the Buccaneers have an 18.5 implied team total. So even with the cheap price tag, the elite matchup, I don't know that I'm going to get to where the field is with Rachaad White at 19% ownership. Chuba Hubbard, I'm a little bit torn on. I think I'll probably be not too far from the field, to be honest. Maybe a little bit under the field, but just their offense has been so bad for Carolina that I'm like, even if he is the main guy, like there's no guarantee he does anything. We've got him at 17% ownership, but I probably won't be too far under the field on Chuba. So largely I'm in line with what the field is doing, I think, with these chalky running backs. But I'd say my biggest stand, I'm probably going to be underweight to the field on Tony Pollard, maybe a little bit on Rachaad White as well. How about you?
Yeah, so Pollard for me as well. And the same thing we talked about last week. And one of the reasons also that kind of got me to the Dallas passing game is Pollard was expected to be popular last week. And I just don't think he's the same player right now. He's been massively inefficient this year, sub 4 yards per carry. We had people in the chat last week saying, hey, don't forget that he broke his leg last year. Yeah, but I don't expect him to get better and get healthier playing more football this year. Right. It's really difficult to come into a football season at less than 100%, which is supposedly what happened here with Tony Pollard, and then get healthier as the season goes on. You only get more banged up as the season goes. And that's what happens with these running backs. They pick up nagging injuries and then you never become 100%. Again, you age, and that's why by the time you're like 25, 26, a lot of these running backs are kind of well past prime. And that's what I'm starting to think might have happened with Tony Pollard. It's unfortunate because he was an absolute stud at the running back position, but was buried behind Zeke. Now Zeke's gone, and it looks like Pollard may have aged out. So now it's like, all right, well, what do the Cowboys now do? Running the football. So Tony Pollard, he is somebody that I am with you. I like being underweight to the field too. The running backs I'm prioritizing of the popular guys, it is Chuba Hubbard, primarily because the price point is also going to be starting ahead of Miles Sanders this week. Just to throw in a betting angle as well, his over-under for receiving yards is 10.5 this weekend. He has been pretty involved in the passing game when he's been on the field this year. So I do like him for over 10.5 passing yards. So 2 pass catching backs that I like this weekend. I like them on FanDuel and DraftKings, even though on FanDuel it's the half PPR point. Chuba Hubbard and Ramondre Stevenson. We're talking about the Patriots not having guys to throw the football to. remember the role that Stevenson had in this offense last year. Now, kind of similar to Pollard, who we were just talking about, he's lost out on some touches to Zeke this year. But I have to think that this situation with all of the pass catchers just being out for the Patriots, the latest one being Kendrick Bourne, who became the number one wide receiver. He tears his ACL last week. I think Stevenson just ends up becoming a guy who has to be more involved in the passing game, not even because the Patriots have wanted to use him this year, but because they have to. They are very thin on guys to throw the football to. So I like getting Ramondre Stevenson into lineups, and kind of similar to the Alvin Kamara situation, I don't mind him as a stack with Mac Jones, just in the same way that I like Derek Carr combined with Alvin Kamara as a passing game stack.
I feel like Ramondre Stevenson is an example of the field getting sharper, because I came in today before looking at the ownership expecting Ramondre Stevenson to be like my favorite contrarian option. And it's like, oh, the field is actually getting there, even though he hasn't really done much so far this year. Yeah, it just looks like a great spot against the Commanders without, again, they got rid of two of their best defensive linemen. So just a great spot against a bad Commanders defense for Ramondre Stevenson. Played 31 of 51 snaps last week, had 10 of 19 rushing attempts, 10 of 17 running back rushing attempts, and ran routes on 50% of dropbacks. So yeah, seems like a spot where Stevenson could get involved, could finally have a great game here against a really bad Commanders defense across the board. So yeah, definitely with you on Stevenson. I was actually looking at Bijan Robinson, because I noticed last week he actually played 48 of 66 snaps last week. Tyler Algier played just 15 snaps. It is interesting. They still had Bijan had 11 rushing attempts to Tyler Algier's 8. So like Algier is just getting more rushing attempts when he is out there. But overall, more rushing attempts for Bijan, 11 to 8 last week, ran 28 routes on 43 dropbacks. So that's 65% route participation, had a few targets. Vikings defense has been much better this year than it was last year. So that's, not an elite matchup this year for Bijan Robinson, but his price all the way down to 6,100, given the 48 snaps, 73% snap percentage. I think that there is, room for there's upside in Bijan Robinson to hit against this Vikings team. So I do have some interest in Bijan Robinson. That's one that, is kind of chalky. We have him at 16% ownership, but just one name that I had to look into a little bit more. And I think I do like him.
Are there any really contrarian running backs you like? Because I'm finding this to be a difficult slate to get crazy different at running back, because there are so many running backs that look good and there's no massive chalk at the position that what I'm really doing is it's like, hey, a lot of these guys are projected for 15 to 22% ownership. And the ones that I really like Hubbard, Stevenson, I'm inclined to get them in like 40% of lineups. And the ones like Pollard, who are 20% owned, I'm inclined to get him in like single digit percentage of lineups. So that's more how I'm differentiating my running back pool. I can't really find a ton of guys that are projected for like 3-4% ownership that I want to be playing in like 15% of lineups or anything like that. Do you see it differently? Are there any super contrarian running back plays that are really standing out to you?
I kind of like Jerome Ford and or Kareem Hunt. I think my preference is Jerome Ford. He's 5,300. We do him at 6% ownership, so like not extremely contrarian, but more contrarian than the running backs we have talked about. Nice spot against Arizona. So again, just taking advantage of that Arizona run defense has actually worked out. Like Kenneth Walker, we all jammed in against Arizona. That didn't really go so great, but I still think that it's a bad enough defense that when a running back is getting opportunities, and I think Jerome Ford should see opportunities at 5,300. So I do like a 6% owned Jerome Ford, and so do the tools. We have him about 10% chance of being optimal. So some positive leverage there. I agree with you though. Like I'm not loving the contrarian option this week. Maybe I'll have to keep thinking about going more contrarian. But as of right now, I think I'm largely going to be living with the more popular options. Yeah, Gus Edwards is at 10% owned. I was debating, like, do I want to go to any of these Bears running backs? We've got Deontay Foreman and Roschon Johnson at really low ownership. Roschon played 23. I guess it was such a split backfield last week that if they're all active again, it's a little bit tough. We had Roschon play 23 snaps, Foreman 19, Darrington Evans 17. So I wanted to say that I was interested in one of them, but that is just so evenly split that it makes it tough. Yeah, honestly, I don't really see many contrarian running backs that I love this week.
Mike, we did just get a projection and ownership update to now reflect that DeMarcado is out for the Cardinals. Can you refresh that page and just pull up the projections for the Cardinals running backs? Because this is a situation that, it's a new, fresh one. We don't get a whole lot of breaking injury news. Well, for whatever reason, this is a couple weeks in a row that Neil and I have done the show where a player that's been important to the slate has gotten ruled out right before we've started. But one thing I think we should talk about is, what do we think is going to happen with the Cardinals backfield? And now that we have this updated ownership, the guy that we have projected to be the most popular out of the backfield, Keontae Ingram, is projected for 6% ownership on FanDuel. Over on DraftKings, he's only $4,300, projected for 5% ownership. So I was curious to see what it ended up being that his ownership was when we got here. And if I had to play somebody who's crazy, like cheap and isn't all that popular at the spot, now that I'm seeing this updated ownership on Ingram, if he's going to be 4 or 5% owned at $4,300 on DK, 5,000 on $5,000 flat on FanDuel, I don't think that's a terrible contrarian play, because the Cardinals have, I don't know how, but they've somehow found success running the football pretty consistently this year.
Yeah, so we have, just looking at last week, Emari Demercado, as you mentioned, has been ruled out, played 40 of 71 snaps. Keontae Ingram was the pretty clear running back 2 for the Cardinals last week, played 26 of 71 snaps. So I think it is reasonable to expect Keontae Ingram to kind of take over that workload in Arizona. So what do we have the odds? Because this is a spot, like, it doesn't instinctively, I'm not like I want to play a running back against the Browns. I feel like they have been good enough. I know I saw Derek Brown mentioned on Twitter that maybe they have not been as good as some of the underlying stats would indicate, but I don't know that I want to play the Cardinals against the Browns all that much. We have Ingram at 5% ownership, 3% chance to be an optimal. So that is kind of in line with what I was, with my instinct of like, do I really want to play these Cardinals guys? But I agree with you. Like, if you're going to somebody who is super cheap as of right now, like Keontae Ingram is starting running back at 4,300. So even in not a great matchup, like, you see it all the time, running backs who are in bad matchups just score from the goal line, score a touchdown or 2, and end up being, get a few carries, and suddenly they're optimal even in a bad matchup. So yeah, I think Ingram certainly playable at 4,300.
Yeah, 40 and FanDuel price point as well, 5,000, just super cheap on both sites, Ingram. So if you're in a spot where, let's say, you need to fill out like a flex spot or something, it's like, oh, I've been really expensive at other positions, I've got this salary pinch, you need to fill the roster spot. I would say that Ingram is your best bet to save salary at that kind of price point, with the possibility that he could be a workhorse for them this weekend. There was an expectation that he was going to be when Connor first got ruled out, and then Demercado kind of came out of nowhere. I don't know if you're like me, but I was like, who the hell is this Demercado guy when we first started seeing him get touches? And then all of a sudden he became the guy for them. I wouldn't be shocked to see Ingram ends up stepping up and playing a bigger role now. Anything else that standing out to you at running back?
Yeah, I guess we didn't mention Devin Singletary, also at that same price point at 4,300 with Dameon Pierce out, is the other option I would say, who I think is going to be higher owned than Demercado, but a fine matchup with Tampa Bay. They are ranked 13th against the run in terms of DVOA. So not a great matchup there, but if Devin Singletary presumably going to be playing as the running back 1 for the Texans now at 4,300, I put him in that same conversation with Demercado as just somebody who is too cheap. We do have him at 15% ownership now in our latest update. So we've seen Devin Singletary's ownership come up with Dameon Pierce being out, and we actually have slight negative leverage, but he's just another of those cheap running backs you can consider.
Yeah, he is projected actually for 15% ownership on both DraftKings and FanDuel. He's 4,300 on DK, 5,300 on FanDuel. And I don't think there's a massive difference between Ingram and Singletary. So with that in mind, I would rather play I'd rather play Ingram than Singletary for a third of the ownership.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Just take the ownership discount.
So let's go ahead and start talking about some of the pass catchers. But first, if you guys want to sign up for the NFL package, we have it at Stokastic.com. I've got a link for that below in the description box. And it's always stuff that's getting updated as we go. It's very rare that we get this much breaking news, like I said, on a Saturday afternoon. But all is now fresh and been updated, and everything as more news breaks is going to be updated. So if you guys are looking for updated ownership and projections, that'll be up on the site as the news comes out. And then, of course, our contest generator Sims tool, that is all also updated in real time. And then one other thing that we have going on right now, Neil, is our NBA lineup generator deal. Now, I know this is a football show, but with that in mind, if you guys are maybe just starting to play NBA DFS and you've been more into NFL and you've been looking at NBA and you're like, what do I do with NBA DFS? The NBA lineup generator has you covered. It is it's the most easy tool that we have to use over at Stokastic.com. Neil does a bunch of videos for the NFL lineup generator. We got Adam does videos for the NBA lineup generator, and it is going to build lineups for you, lineups that we're projecting to be plus EV. all you're telling it is, do you want the lineups to be chalky, contrarian? It's going to show you some lineups. You could pick which ones you like. You could discard ones that you don't like. You could upload up to 20 of them to DraftKings, FanDuel, whatever it is that you guys are playing. And with the deal we have going on right now, NBA Treat, you get access to it for less than $5 when you sign up for the first time. So less than $5 for the first week. And I do think you guys are going to like the product, and you're going to want to stick around and continue using the NBA lineup generator. So if you want to get your foot into the door of the NBA waters, or if you just want to help yourself get some better lineups out there, sign up for the NBA lineup generator, less than $5 with the promo code NBA Treat. And there's a link below in the description box. It's already got all that loaded in there for you. Let's move on to the pass catchers, Neil. We go ahead and look at the wide receivers for this weekend. Let me go back and select all the teams on my screen here, so I'm not only looking at the Cardinals, because I was looking at the Cardinals running backs a second ago. I have a feeling I want to look at more wide receivers than just players from the Cardinals right now. And another spot, wide receiver, kind of similar to running back, where we don't have any kind of real crazy, massive chalk at the high end on DraftKings. We got Devontae Adams, CeeDee Lamb, Cooper Kupp, A.J. Brown. Those players are all priced north of 8K. Amongst the pay-up options, do you have a preferred option?
Yeah, of the pay-up options, I mean, it's going to somewhat depend on the stack I'm playing. Like if I'm playing Jalen Hurts, obviously it's going to be A.J. Brown. I guess that kind of goes without saying. It sort of depends on if Matthew Stafford is playing, because if Matthew Stafford ultimately plays, which I'm not expecting, I think Stafford is going to be out, which is going to make it tough for me to want to play Cooper Kupp. But if Stafford somehow is in, it would be Cooper Kupp. I would absolutely love playing a low-owned Cooper Kupp. As things stand, maybe Devontae Adams. We have Devontae Adams at just 9% ownership, 11% chance to be an optimal. Great spot here against the Giants. New quarterback in there, Aiden O'Connell coming in to play this game. Would imagine he's going to be peppering Adams with targets. Did you watch that last game where Devontae Adams was getting so frustrated with Jimmy Garoppolo? Do you see the highlights of Devontae Adams? Like, he's a little bitch, like on the sideline, cussing about Jimmy Garoppolo.
I didn't see that. I'll look it up after this.
He was very upset because Jimmy Garoppolo had him wide open twice for would have been long touchdowns and just completely missed him. So, new quarterback might help there for Devontae Adams. So I think that he is probably my favorite of the pay up options. But obviously, like in my Eagles stacks, I'm going to be playing some AJ Brown. My Cowboys stacks, I'll play some CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb, we actually have some positive leverage on too. 16% ownership, 19.5% chance to be an optimal. But I'm going to stick with Devontae Adams. How do you see it?
Yeah, so by the way, goes to show money comes at a cost, does it not? Devontae Adams leaves the Packers. He was in a good situation with Aaron Rodgers for a lot of years. Ends up in Oakland and not Oakland, Las Vegas now. Seems to hate it there. He's been nothing but unhappy since he's gotten there because the team's been terrible. He doesn't have quarterbacks who could throw him the football. For me, if I'm paying up for a wide receiver, and this correlates very much with the stacks I'm getting to, it's A.J. Brown. He has just been an absolute monster to start the year. And it's funny. If I'm going to tell you a secret here, Neil, when I watched A.J. Brown week 1 and week 2 of the season, I was wondering, like, well, he looks a little slower this year. And I was wondering, like, are we kind of starting to see a decline of A.J. Brown? I'm happy I didn't tweet anything or say anything about it publicly or admit that was how I was feeling after watching him for a couple of games, because his last handful of games, he has now had 127 or more receiving yards in every single game since week 3 of the NFL season. He is lighting the league on fire to the point where we are now looking at both Tyreek Hill and A.J. Brown are on pace to break the single season receiving record. I'd said that my preferred pay-up option on DraftKings at QB is Jalen Hurts. On FanDuel, it's Lamar Jackson, but I still have double-digit exposure to Jalen Hurts. And by far, A.J. Brown is the most sensible stacking option with him. So that's a combination I like getting to. A.J. Brown to Jalen Hurts. So A.J. Brown is a pay-up wide receiver. That is something that I'm liking.
Yeah, I mean, I like that stack quite a bit too. As I said, I'm going to be going to a good amount of Devontae Adams, but I love those stacks of just doing Jalen Hurts with A.J. Brown makes a ton of sense here.
All right, let's go ahead and move down a little bit now. The wide receiver pricing. We're starting to look at the wide receivers in like that 7K to 6K-ish type range. I got to be honest with you, Neil. I don't like much of it. I don't like much of it at all. I like Chris Olave because he works well with my Saints stacks, but he is the only wide receiver from 6K to 8,100 that I'm getting double-digit exposure to. That's it.
That was Chris Olave, you said?
Yeah, Chris Olave, the only one.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to get a good amount of Chris Olave. Michael Pittman looks really good in the tools. We've got him. He's 6,600. We didn't even talk about playing Gardner Minshew, but Pittman at least looks good. 12.8% ownership, 17% chance being optimal. So he's another one in that range that I consider. Yeah, it's not my favorite range this week. Just looking through the wide receivers here. I'm curious what the Panthers looked like last week with the handing over play calling duties. We still had, Adam Thielen still ran routes on 92.5% of dropbacks, as did Jonathan Mingo, but looks like and 11 targets last week for Adam Thielen. So no big changes there. I'm trying to poke holes in the Adam Thielen play because I just don't want to play Adam Thielen at 7,500. But he, still looks okay in the tools, but I'm with you. I'm not going to be playing a ton from that range. I think in general, I'm going to be playing from some cheaper wide receivers. I mentioned I'm going to be playing some Brown stacks. We do have Amari Cooper. I mean, he's very neutral in the tools, basically 11% ownership, 11% chance of being optimal, but I'm going to be playing him in some of my Brown stacks. But yeah, in general, it's just not my favorite range in the mid-range here.
All right. So, by the way, Adam Thielen, because we're sponsored by Rainmakers. So, one of the features of Rainmakers is you can only play one superstar player in each lineup. And there are 5 superstar QBs, 5 running backs, 5 wide receivers. One of the things that was most surprising to me, because they just updated the superstar status, they gave Adam Thielen superstar status. Like, they're considering one of the absolute top fantasy wide receivers in football this year. And on one hand, I agree with, like, if you look at just the results
he clearly
this year, it's like, yeah, okay, I can see it. The other point too is now you're building your line. It's like, all right, do I want to play Adam Thielen or Tyreek Hill as the comparison point? So I'm with you. I can't get by. Maybe it's just a bias on my part. I was playing Adam Thielen when he was cheaper earlier in the year. I can't pay this price point for Adam Thielen on FanDuel or DraftKings. Running my lineups through the Sims here, I'm hardly getting to any of him on either site. I got him in a few lineups on DraftKings, FanDuel. I got him in 2% of lineups. Part of it too is I don't really love Bryce Young at QB, so it's going to be tough for me to pay up for Adam Thielen, especially because the opportunity cost. It's all right, Adam Thielen, AJ Brown, or Cooper Kupp. It seems like he doesn't belong at all.
Agreed. Yeah, that's why I'm like trying to poke holes in it, trying to find some reason to not play Adam Thielen. But the target share is just so incredible for Adam Thielen that I'm probably not going to get there a ton. But I also understand why he is still getting ownership, because you just don't find many players in the NFL that are getting that kind of target share.
Yeah, so that's not a guy that I'm looking to pay up for either. If I'm going all the way to the top end, AJ Brown is my preferred option, followed by CeeDee Lamb. But I mean, it's AJ Brown by a pretty wide margin for me over the rest of those guys. And then once I get to the cheaper range, I mentioned I like Olave on both FanDuel and DraftKings. He's in the upper 6K range on FanDuel, in the mid to low 6K range. I think it's $6,300 over on DraftKings, and just correlates with the amount of exposure that I'm getting to with Derek Carr. And Carr, he's not been efficient this year, but the Saints really let him throw the football a whole bunch. So he's going to keep throwing the ball, as much as 50 plus times in some of these games. It's going to lead to some big games for Chris Olave, even if we haven't really seen it all that much yet. If we get to the cheaper wide receivers, Neil, are there any wide receivers you're prioritizing at the cheaper end for this slate?
Well, I mean, just bringing it down below 6,000. I do really like Nico Collins and Tank Dell for Houston. I mentioned when we're talking about quarterbacks that I like CJ Stroud. Those are the two pass catchers that I really want to be pairing with CJ Stroud. Last week, we actually had Tank Dell leading the team in route participation, ran 24 routes. Nico Collins just behind at 20, and that's 89% route participation for Tank Dell. So that's promising for a rookie wide receiver coming in, leading the team in route participation. But really think both of those are playable. I like both. We have Nico Collins coming in at 17% ownership, 17% chance of being optimal. And then Tank Dell, we have at, where is he? Missing him. Can't find. Oh, here is 9% ownership, 7% chance to be an optimal. So, doesn't look fantastic in the tools, but at least playable. Something I'm going to consider playing. We talked about Lamar Jackson stacks. Mm-hmm. Certainly Zay Flowers at 5,700. Somebody we have to consider. We have him at 15% ownership, 17% chance to be an optimal. So, going to be playing some Zay Flowers for sure. Michael Thomas is just 4,700. He looks fantastic in the tools. 9% projected ownership for Can't Guard Mike. 14% chance of being optimal. He's just 4,700. That's just too cheap for. Wow, it's Rashid Shaheed only 200 less expensive than Michael Thomas at this point is kind of nuts. So as we're talking about the Saints, I mean, looking at last week, Michael Thomas, 68% route participation, Rashid Shaheed, 52% route participation. Just Michael Thomas is just out there so much more. 7 targets last week to Shaheed's 3. He's only 200 more expensive. If I have to choose between those two, even though Rashid Shaheed clearly has shown his big play upside, Michael Thomas just much safer and getting just 9% ownership. So hard not to have some interest there. And then we kind of talked about him at the top of the show, but Demario Douglas, like, clearly just stands out like a sore thumb as the best value play. He's just 4,000. We've got him at 16% ownership, 21% chance of being optimal. I have to imagine I'm going to be well above the field. If the field is under 20% on Demario Douglas, I think I'm going to be well above the field there.
He's my most rostered player, not just at wide receiver, but on the slate by a really wide margin. On both DraftKings and FanDuel, I'm getting to a ton of Demario Douglas. He was in about half of my top 150 lineups in the Sims tool on FanDuel. DK north of 70% of my top 150 lineups. It's the situation where just one by one, we see players get hurt, ruled out by the Patriots. And now we're left to Demario Douglas as the go-to guy at wide receiver. 7 targets last week, 6 targets the week before. And those were games that Kendrick Bourne was in, at least last week for part of the game. Kendrick Bourne was out there. So I think Demario Douglas is probably in line for double-digit targets this week, as long as the Patriots are behind in throwing the football, which how can you expect the Patriots to not be behind in football games at this point of the season? So I think Demario Douglas at his cheap price point, I'm not going to tell you he's the best wide receiver in the world. He clearly is not. But relative to his price point, the other cheap wide receiving options, I'm planning on playing a lot of Demario Douglas this week. My favorite value play of the entire slate at any position. And I don't even see anybody all that comparable. And we're going to build some lineups in the lineup generator here in a second, because I'm curious to see how much of Demario Douglas we get to. I want to see how closely the lineup generator is to what I'm getting to in the Sims tool. But is there any other cheap wide receiver that you're seeing as a potential pivot off of Douglas?
Yeah, so I mean, I agree with you. Demario Douglas clearly stands alone there. 27 routes run, 84% route participation last week. The next on the Patriots was Jalen Reagor at 62.5%. If Jalen Reagor is going to be your wide receiver too, that is troubling for the Patriots. So yeah, love Demario Douglas. I wouldn't say there's anybody else who's like stands out as being comparable to Demario Douglas. I'm trying to decide if I'm going to go back to Elijah Moore at all. He's just getting 6.7% ownership. I talked about how I'm going to probably play some Cleveland stacks. I might take some shots on Elijah Moore, even though he's been so bad this week. Maybe Van Jefferson, 3,600. We're not going to have any Drake. Drake London is out this week, so maybe Van Jefferson has more opportunities. Not really a team that I love targeting in general for Atlanta, but 3,600. I don't know if I really want to go there. I'll at least think about it, because we have him at 4% ownership. Van Jefferson, 5.5% chance of being optimal. The one other that I'll note that I'm sort of interested in here, actually 2 more, because Lamar Jackson came out and said that they need to get Rashad Bateman more involved. I'm going to be playing some Lamar Jackson stacks. Maybe I'll include Rashad Bateman at 3,300 in some of those. There's not a lot to feel really good about with Rashad Bateman, but the fact that the quarterback came out and said we need to get him more involved is at least something. But he only ran 14 routes last week, 44% route participation. I don't really want to go crazy there. But Jonathan Mingo, I do want to note Jonathan Mingo last week, and I think I already mentioned this when talking about Adam Thielen, but last week Jonathan Mingo ran routes on 92.5% of dropbacks, tied with Adam Thielen last week. Saw 5 targets. So I do think Jonathan Mingo appears to be kind of rising up the ranks there. They did, as I said, hand over play calling duties to the offensive coordinator. So you can at least hope for some changes there where maybe some of these other receivers get involved. And actually, DJ Chark ran just 1 fewer route than Adam Thielen and Jonathan Mingo. So if you're looking for like a really cheap contrarian guy in an otherwise chalky lineup, I think you consider Mingo or Chark there.
Yeah, some other cheap guys. I mean, Michael Thomas also just correlates with my Derek Carr lineup. So Derek Carr stacking with Alvin Kamara, have lineups with Olave, have lineups with Thomas. Those are the different pass catching options been kind of rotating through here with Derek Carr. And then also cheap from the Giants. Wan'Dale Robinson is a player who I've probably been overweight to on almost every single slate that he's been on. I've brought him up on a lot of shows this year. This is more of a DK specific play over on Fan. And also, this is very contingent on Daniel Jones being the quarterback. There's no chance that I think
they named him already.
Yeah, but just like being sure that it ends up being him out there. Because don't forget, too, when Daniel Jones first got hurt, they were like, hey, it's week to week. And then he was continually out for more and more weeks. If it's DeVito at quarterback again, then absolutely no thank you. But if Robinson is going to be out there starting with Daniel Jones as the QB again, remember the targets that this guy was getting in his target share when Daniel Jones was the quarterback last. We saw him the last game that Daniel Jones was out there. This was kind of like before he was really a full go healthy player, Robinson. He had like an absurd target share. The first game he had 5 targets and he ran, it was like 8 or 9 routes. And so it was 5 targets, 6 targets, 6 targets. And in the last game that he played with, or 2 games ago that he played with Tyrod Taylor, 8 targets, got 8 of them for 62 yards. So the Giants have really prioritized Robinson when they've been throwing the football. Different circumstances have prevented them from throwing the football as much as of late. So last week, it was the fact that DeVito was the quarterback after Tyrod Taylor got hurt. And then the Giants finished, I think it was -8 or -9 total passing yards, which...
Did they really? My God, I didn't realize that.
And should have won the game also.
Yeah.
Lost in overtime because of just terrible decision-making by Daboll. So I think Wan'Dale Robinson, $3,500, that is another cheap wide receiver that we could get to. Anything else you want to add at wide receiver? If not, Neil, then we'll build some lineups in the lineup generator. We'll talk about tight ends, and we'll do our favorite stacks.
Yeah, I can get behind Wan'Dale Robinson. You have seen coming into the year, we had no idea what the Giants were going to do, but they seem to be condensing their wide receivers that they're playing. Wan'Dale Robinson, I like that call out. I would also throw Darius Slayton in there. He's just clearly running routes. Like he's kind of a leader in the clubhouse in terms of route participation in recent weeks. Only saw 2 targets last week, but if he's going to be out there enough at 3,200, I think you can throw him into that contrarian cheap bucket as well with Robinson and with the Panthers guys.
And we have a super chat here. Mike, if you wouldn't mind, put the NFL lineup generator up on screen so that Neil and I could see it. We'll look at some lineups from there. And as you're selecting the lineups, we'll talk to you guys a little bit about how it works. We also got a super chat here from Rough Buff Fire. So Rough Buff Fire wants to know, can you give a brief explanation on ownership projections? How accurate are they? Thanks. So I'm not going to say that these are like the absolute truth of what the ownership is going to be, but they're very accurate. We have the most accurate ownership projections of anybody in the industry. Our ownership projections, an algorithm that we've been working on, extensively for a lot of years now. And how it works, I couldn't tell you the exact ins and outs of all of it, but it's algorithm based. So like in the same way that we have an algorithm that gives you fantasy projections that are projecting how many fantasy points each player has, we have an algorithm that has an ownership projection and that runs and it projects what each player's ownership is going to be. So that's why I think is the best way to look at it, is it's comparable to like a fantasy point projection, but for ownership. So it's pretty accurate, but I'm not going to tell you like each player is to the decimal point, the exact ownership of what they're going to be, but it plays a massive role, our ownership projections, and how I build my lineups and which players I get to. Is there anything else you would add to that?
Yeah, I would say that's great analysis. I would also add they get more and more accurate as you get closer to lock. So like the ownership we're looking at right now might not be as good as it's going to be 23 hours from now. That's when you're going to get the best ownership projections.
So it progressively gets better, which is also just part of it getting more information because, when you're doing the shows on, like a Wednesday or a Thursday, we have an ownership show that we do on Thursday. It's the first look at the ownership run and it's better than nothing. But, when you got players who are questionable on the injury report, it's hard to know what the situations are going to be until the dust settles. So Neil is right that it gets more accurate as the week goes on, but still they're pretty good at this point in the week as well. Although I wouldn't just submit my lineups on a Saturday afternoon and go, all right, done for the weekend. Still want to wait until closer to lock on Sunday to make any kind of final adjustments. But if you guys look at the NFL lineup generator here, which we do have a separate package for that is less than $15, and it includes all of the different showdown slates as well as the main slates for DraftKings and FanDuel. Just for here, let's build some lineups in DraftKings. We'll do the main slate for DK. And let's make some one-man stacks. And we'll do contrarian. Just curious to see what ends up popping up here. So these are the different inputs that you guys can do in here to really determine how you want the outlook of your lineups to be. And then we'll give you lineups that are projected to be plus EV. And then what you could do here is you could save lineups. You could discard some lineups. We'll just look at this lineup right here, the first one that was built. And let's see if I could read the names on screen. We've got Mac Jones at quarterback here. We got the running backs, Alvin Kamara, Saquon Barkley. Pass catchers, Devontae Adams. Looks like that's Robinson.
Wan'Dale, yep.
And then is that Juju? All right, Juju, Trey McBride, Jacobs, and then the Colts defense. All right. So I couldn't really see this, but I was able to see the team logos and kind of figure out based on the character. I don't know if it's for you, but when I'm reading stuff through Zoom, it's very blurry.
Yeah, no, it's very blurry. You kind of you kind of need to use your context clues of the team logo and like the length of the name, kind of. But yeah, I think we nailed this lineup. Interesting to see that the first lineup we have is Mac Jones to Juju Smith-Schuster instead of Demario Douglas.
Probably partly because we made a contrarian
True.
lineup here and put it on contrarian, but then something you guys could do from here as well is you could save, you could discard lineups ones you don't like, and then it'll give you a portfolio at the end with all of your player exposures, and you could use that to upload it directly to DraftKings, FanDuel, whatever it is you're playing. And like I said, we've also got this for the showdown slate, so you can build lineups out, and a really good tool for newer DFS players or somebody who wants to bolster your play by getting better lineups that are built for you. We have this for NBA as well. And we've got the promo that is only for NBA right now. We've got the NFL lineup generator that you guys could get for $14.95 per week. But if you want to sign up for the NBA one right now, $4.99 per week using the promo code breaking news, as Mike has it up on screen. NBA lineup generator using the promo code NBA treat, get access to it for less than $5 now. But let's go ahead here now and talk about the tight ends and then our favorite stacks for the weekend, Neil. And I've got to be honest with you. I'm starting to view the tight end position kind of similar to how I view defenses in previous years, especially that we have, no Kelsey on the main slate or anything like that. What are your priorities, if any, at tight end? I've got like four tight ends that I'm getting double digit exposure to. If you want to guess who they are.
I would go Mark Andrews. Is he one of them?
He is. You are 1 for 1.
Trey McBride.
You're 1 for 2. He's not one of them this week.
He
was your I think you might have been trying to recall last week where he was the last one.
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, I was thinking about how much you liked Trey McBride last week, and that worked out quite well for you last week. All right, so Mark Andrews, Dalton Schultz.
Schultz is another one.
And if if you're using the tools, is it TJ Hawkinson?
TJ Hawkinson, you got 3 of them. The other one, I think you might be able to figure out it's a decent tight end and correlates with a quarterback I liked.
Dallas Goedert.
Correct. So they're pretty good. You went 4 for 5. You were able to get all of them. And the only one that you missed there was somebody who I liked last week. Again, he played well, so it wasn't a terrible guess. So it's different reasons. So TJ Hawkinson is projected for less ownership than Jordan Addison right now. And he just is playing at a much more difficult position, Phil. So I like the leverage we're getting by playing Hawkinson at tight end instead of Jordan Addison at wide receiver. And then also you got like a pretty reasonable salary on TJ Hawkinson. Hawkinson is only $5,200 over on DraftKings. On FanDuel, Hawkinson is priced at $6,700. We've seen him with very clear big play upside. You do get worried about the quarterback situation for your Vikings now that it's Hall starting at QB and there's now more Kirk Cousins after Cousins tore his Achilles. But a lot of times we do see a couple of things, Neil, and this is going to be a narrative based, but I do believe it to be true. What do we see most often when a young quarterback takes over a team? Short passing routes to tight ends and running backs. This is something that I feel pretty comfortable saying that it's not going to be the case in all scenarios, but more often than not, it is going to be the truth that when quarterbacks start to feel pressure and they're making, first, second career starts, they're newer, they find a lot more comfort throwing short passing routes to tight ends and running backs. And I think that's where TJ Hawkinson could stand out, especially at modest ownership this weekend. So Hawkinson and then Mark Andrews correlating with Lamar Jackson, Dallas Goedert correlating with Jalen Hurts, and then Dalton Schultz just being somebody who I think rates out as a pretty good points per dollar play in our projections and shows up in the Sims tool for me. Any disagreement on those tight ends? Anybody else that you would like to add to the mix?
Yeah, no, I like all of those calls. I'd add David Njoku is just 3,800. If I've mentioned on every position now, I guess, how I have some interest in Cleveland just against this Arizona defense. Not very good. We've got Njoku at 9% ownership, 10% chance to be an optimal. He's only 3,800. Just another really cheap stack that could really go off against the Cardinals, I think. So I would throw Njoku in there. You can play either of the Pats tight ends in your Mac Jones stacks, obviously. But honestly, I don't know that I'm going like too crazy here with anybody else. Ferguson totally fine in those game stacks, but yeah, I'd say you kind of already named my favorite tight ends. We do have Darren Waller out.
Yeah,
Daniel Bellinger at 2,500 is, I guess, sort of interesting.
Not for me. I could see the case for him, but I got Bellinger. Yeah, I didn't get Bellinger. Didn't show up. So out of my top 150 lineups on FanDuel and DraftKings, Bellinger is in 0 of them.
Okay. I would definitely have some in 150 lineups just because he is cheap enough, has shown flashes in the past, and he's, as I said, 2,500 with Waller out. I would anticipate that he's going to be running a ton of routes. Even last week, he ran routes on 46% of dropback. So I think that I like him a little bit better than you do as just a pay down option. Like if you have, 2,600 left over, I think Bellinger is a fine option there, but I get it. Like he hasn't done that much.
All right, so maybe I'll give him a little ROI boost, get him in a few lineups here or there, but he won't be like a massively important play for me or anything like that. And let's wrap up the show here now, Neil. And if you guys haven't done it, do us a big favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Stacks. Last week, our stacks both did pretty well. My favorite stack of the week was Dak Prescott to Jake Ferguson and CeeDee Lamb, which I think was like the best stack you could possibly have last week.
Yeah.
And then you had Jalen Hurts to Devontae Smith, and Smith just came a yard short of that 100-yard bonus, or else he would have been he was a good contrarian play, but would have been a really good contrarian play if he finished with one more receiving yard to get those few extra fantasy points. For this weekend, though, Neil, what is your favorite stack? If you're building one lineup in a large field tournament or a single entry, what would be the quarterback and the pass catchers you go to?
I think I'm just going to go to Lamar and Mark Andrews, fill that tight end spot with the top tight end, fill that quarterback spot. It's just a nice matchup here for Baltimore. So I think I'll go Lamar to Mark Andrews.
All right. You ready for a dog shit stack that I'm about to give out that I'm irrationally confident is going to work for DFS purposes?
I thought I was leaving the Eagles for you, but yeah, go.
No.
Let's see your ugly stack here.
No. Single entry. There are a handful of quarterbacks I like, so I'm not sure this is the stack that I'm for sure playing in single entry, but I know I'm going to be overweight to the field to it. Mac Jones to Ramondre Stevenson and Demario Douglas. Douglas is my most roster player on the slate, so I felt like I had to include him in this. But, I mean, you just look at the situation the Patriots have. They're so shorthanded in the passing game. If Mac Jones is anywhat decent, which hasn't been the case this year, but he's going up against the Commanders, which this Commanders defense has been absolutely terrible this year. Like we saw Tyrod Taylor have a good fantasy game against Commanders. We've seen everybody have a good fantasy game against Commanders. Don't stop anybody. It's a tough situation. This is a real stoppable force against a movable object situation, Neil. Mac Jones can't throw the football against anybody. The Commanders can't stop anybody. And the Commanders just traded away Sweat and Chase Young at the trade deadline. So this defense that already was terrible and couldn't defend the pass have now taken away like two of their only ways to pressure the quarterback. So I think this is a situation that's pretty favorable for the Patriots offense. They're very cheap. So Mac Jones, Ramondre Stevenson, Demario Douglas, that's my favorite stack of the week. And that's going to do it for us today here. If you've not done it yet, one more time, guys, take the half second of your time to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Good luck with all your lineups this weekend. I'll see you back here next weekend.